ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Obscenity. And before we get started with the video here, just a couple of things I wanted to say. There's a new layout. I'm just trying a bunch of different designs right now, trying to figure out which one works best for me, which one works best for the community. The one stipulation with this design is I would probably change the background image between most videos. They're all just going to be stock images of, like, Call of Duty zombies or whatever topic I'm talking about searched up. Um, but I will, I think, try to, vary it if I decide to stick with this design. Beyond that, I wanted to apologize. I actually had a Lex video in this slot, a Mr. T Lexify video. But the auto-generated YouTube script, which, by the way, I used YouTube's auto-generated scripts sort of as the basis on which I take notes. Um, just about, where to stop and talk and where to not stop, just for the sake of continuity of the videos. That's in Korean on Lex's video, so I'm gonna have to retype it by hand, because when I translate it to English, it's still a little jarbled, to put it mildly. You guys can try it on your own if you want. Um, but, that's going to take a while. We're going to need to delay that a little bit. And that actually pairs well with one of the suggestions I've gotten recently, which was overall shorter run times. So, this review of a 38-minute video is going to be split into 3 parts. I believe each one covering 10 minutes, a little over, maybe a little less. It really depends on how much I have to say, and the goal time we're going to be shooting for is between 30 and 45 minutes. I think we're going to continue that sort of trend from now on, unless it's really, despised, unless people really prefer the full-length hour and a half, 2-hour, 2.5-hour commentaries. I will admit that in this specific instance, the 3 parts is warranted because it also gives me time to manually transcribe Lex's video so that I can upload that later down the road. But overall, it doesn't have to be something that stays. We are, of course, still in a highly experimental phase with the channel. At any rate, I think it's about time we start the video.
Call of Duty Zombies. That may be something you haven't heard much of in the last few years, but I'm sure many of us can think back to a time where it made up a big part of our gaming experience. I want you right now to try and think back to the very first time you played Zombies. Was it at a friend's house or maybe your own? Maybe you played Transit and rode around through the fog on a bus with some weird robot guy. Maybe it was on Black Ops 3 with Shadows of Evil, the beautiful city filled with Cthulhu monsters. Maybe it was Kino Der Toten, the old classic theater map from Black Ops 1. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that little tiny bunker from World at War which started it all. Not Der Toten. See, it doesn't really matter when you started playing Zombies, because I think we can all look back quite fondly on the feeling of that first game, spawning into a map and feeling so vulnerable yet intrigued. You would die on an embarrassingly low round, but you would just be so instantly hooked, like you can't ever remember being hooked before. Discovering the ray gun, acquiring perks, and hitting your first pack-a-punch machine.
First off, I just want to say, Smith, thank you for this video. The editing is absolutely incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed watching this video before deciding to break it down. It was a really good experience as a viewer, and I'll be honest, I strive to one day be able to create content that's sort of on this caliber. Although for now, continuing, the opening to this video is a very, very emotional one. And of course, there's no issue with having emotion because, again, this video isn't really posited as a review. It's not really posited as something that should be a piece of pure fact. But, and of course, this is done well because it is emotion and it's being presented as emotion. It's being, sort of openly laid out as zombies having been an emotional experience. But the reason for my response is actually 2 things. In my personal experience, again, I agree with it. When I first played Town with my friends in elementary school at the time, it was incredible. I was beyond enthralled. On my Xbox, I wasn't allowed to have the game. My dad said it was too violent, so we would sit in their basements. We would play Call of Duty Zombies. we would split screen it most of the time. And even though we died, I think round 16 was a good round for us at that time to reach. Even though we die on round 16, we'd sit back down, we'd keep going at it, and we'd have an absolute blast, right? However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the experience of everybody. And something like this can no longer be part of zombies, really, at least in my opinion. Because again, in my opinion, video games are getting easier. Take like Pokemon Red and Blue and play them next to their most recent remakes, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, and you'll see a wild difference in the difficulty of the entire game. But that's just a little side note. This kind of leads to my second point, though, is that this intro really fails to attach to all the people who joined after Origins, specifically, as I mentioned later, the period where every Call of Duty game came out with a new zombies. It often worked to maintain the core of BO1 and BO2 while adding general changes, to the game, I guess generally trying to improve it in their own, each developer has at least one spin-off of zombies at this point, right? Exosuits in Advanced Warfare are a really, really good example of this. This sort of change to the gameplay of what we know and love in Treyarch zombies. Smith mentions this later. Smith does bring this point up again, although it's important to note that these games are widely considered inferior to the Treyarch titles when the same difficulty curve is included in a worse game, when the same sort of initial startup struggle, that vulnerability in the early game, is included in a game that's just mechanically worse overall. Players are far more likely, at least in my opinion, to turn away from the franchise as a whole. But of course, we're going to let Lex lay out that argument before we really address it. And for now, let's get back to the video.
It was a game that drew you in and made you fall in love with it. And whether your playtime consisted of ripping casual games with your friends after school or pulling all-nighters trying to get to a new high round, it's safe to say that Zombies holds a special place in a lot of our hearts.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that I personally have done all this. I personally agree with this. I have emotional ties to this. And that's sort of, if it seems like I'm taking a stance against this throughout the rest of the video, I promise that I personally struggle with avoiding the stance that Zombies was flawless. Like, there is a part of me somewhere in my heart that truly wants to believe that Zombies was flawless up through the release of Origins. There's a part of me that wants to believe that all of that was just the heyday, all of that was absolutely perfect. But of course, that part of me is also driven by nostalgia, and I want to just note, continuing the video, that nostalgia is more than likely going to be drained from the majority of my responses for the simple fact that it draws away from the core experience and the argument of the video and the argument for or against Call of Duty Zombies as a franchise.
So, what the hell happened to this game? And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. The fall of Call of Duty Zombies. How one of the most iconic video game modes of our childhood and teenage years slowly faded into a pile of garbage. I want to talk about when the game started going wrong, what caused the game's decline, and
I've already fleshed out this point, right? Oh, and by the way, real quick, apology for the noise. I did start this recording while the HVAC machine was off. However, I can't really tell when it's going to come on, when it's going to stay off. So, until I find a more permanent solution, we're just going to keep the door closed over there, and we're going to try to look beyond it. But the issue of decline itself, at least in my mind, is the subjective one. My personal opinion is, of course, that there was no real decline. If anything, there was an adaptation, more of a change. But that's purely my opinion. We're going to maybe lay out a couple more points to support that through this series. Again, for now, don't run with that. If you've only watched this far into the video, don't run on the assumption that Zombies hasn't gotten worse, it's just changed, because again, I've offered no evidence to back it up.
And most importantly, which was, I think, the final nail in the coffin, Black Ops 4. Black Ops 4 is the obvious target as to what really killed off zombies, but I assure you that there is more to it than just a single bad game. Long before the creation of Black Ops 4, Activision had already sowed the seeds for the demise of our beloved series.
Alright, Alright, before this video continues, I know we're already, 2 minutes into the video, 10 minutes into the recording here. I just wanted to make clear a couple of things that I'm going to be focusing on during this review, because I think they're things that Smith really tried to nail in on too, and so I wanted to kind of I wanted to hold true to the theme of the original video. So the two things that I'm going to be looking at are the inherent issue in saying what made zombies great when it first came out, like World at War, Black Ops 1. So the sort of simplicity, the soft introduction, the new characters, the new game mode. I want to argue that that is fundamentally inapplicable to today's society, to today's sort of gaming culture. And I also want to address the issue with brushing off Activision as a cop-out for Black Ops 4's failure. Throughout this video, as we'll find later, maybe in parts 2 and 3, Smith does spend a while talking about how it's a sort of lazy cop-out to assume that Activision is responsible for the failure of Black Ops 4. However, I'm going to take a very strong stance in this video that that's not true. It's not a cop-out, because it's actually exactly what happened. That Activision's past patterns, that their past behaviors did in fact lead to the unfinished release of Black Ops 4 that Smith mentions and that I support, and that is honestly just true. The crashes, the bugs, the faulty perks, the oddly balanced guns, the inconsistent enemy movement. I'm going to argue that that was all, by and large, a result of Treyarch, and I think Smith is going to support me, though I don't know if there is any background. We'll talk about my speculations on the sort of softness of language in this video later. But for now, if you find any issues in the defenses of these 2 points throughout the video, throughout the next 2 videos, do me a favor, leave me a comment, or even if you find another way to contact me that doesn't, put a comment on my video, that doesn't support the YouTube algorithm, please do it. Because as long as you're civil, I'll be civil, and hopefully we can come to a mutual understanding, or we can agree to disagree on the issue. Because again, my intent is really not to claim that my opinions or views are right, but rather to sort of promote these views as a more factual, down-to-earth look at the game. With that, let's get back to the video.
If we want to understand the fall of zombies, we need to look back to what made it great in the first place. And to do that, we need to go all the way back to Der Toten. Because you see, Zombies was a game that started from creative passion. Now, many of you may not know this, but Zombies was actually a side project by a team of developers that was never even supposed to make it into World at War. It was just something the team was working on for fun. The studio head, Mark Lamia, had even considered stopping the project as it was being a potential waste of time, diverting energy from the main game mode. Ultimately, though, in a fateful and highly intelligent decision, he didn't.
Fortunately, I calmed down just enough.
And you want to know why? It's because the game mode was freaking awesome.
It was clear the excitement around the studio was totally infectious. And this is where we made the very risky, but ultimately the right choice to follow the fun, follow the passion, and bet on a dedicated and talented team.
According to interviews, all the workers and developers at Treyarch who played the original build absolutely loved it.
We started having people from Activision's production management team, and as the infection spread, the organization, one person at a time, even people not on the Call of Duty, working on Call of Duty, were asking to see it.
It was
This publicity in the industry, as with publicity in any industry, is huge. Alongside a testament of infectivity from Mark Lamia, one of the people who sort of pulled the ropes around Treyarch at the time. All puns on infectivity aside, the game mode did shake the industry, like, thoroughly. It wasn't the first game to include zombies, obviously, but from what I could find, it was actually the first, sort of AAA FPS franchise to include such a fleshed-out, horde-based survival mode as a party game outside of its sort of core gameplay.
Was engaging and just so unique that in the end, it got put into the game as a bonus mode for beating the campaign. From a developmental standpoint, it's a miracle that Zombies ever even happened, but is also a testament to how incredible the game mode was. And I think that this is a super overlooked fact as to why the game mode became so successful in the first place. Zombies started as a side passion project on the engine of a much bigger game. There was no pressure from a group of suits sitting in a boardroom asking what will be the most profitable way to boost map pack sales or anything like that.
This statement right here is a huge testament to the importance of corporate entities and their role in ruining human interactions. In fact, it may be the most important point we see in this entire video. Many bigger internet personalities have contracts that bind them. Oh yeah, by the way, quick disclaimer, this is speculative and this may or may not be true. This is an assumption based off of the language of the video so far, and I will also say that I am not an expert in language in any way. I do think that I know a fair amount about it. I like to believe that, but again, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on the topic, so take this all with a grain of salt, please. Many bigger internet personalities, of which I would consider Smith one, have contracts. They bind them to companies, they bind them to video games, they bind them to entities, ultimately to the content that they produce, right? Whether it be sponsored products, individual videos, early access, etc. Those are all things that often have contracts associated with them, fine print sort of binding individual personalities to companies, to games, etc. And this is purely speculative, again, but the stark comparison of what's essentially the miracle of birth, in this case, rather, the miracle of innovation, leads me to believe, honestly, very strongly, that Smith has some sort of contract with Activision, some sort of contract with Treyarch, or even just a sort of gentlemanly handshake agreement that they'll be nice to each other, give each other a pat on the back here or there. And that is sort of lightening his language, because again, that comparison of, the miracle of birth to a couple of suits just kind of sitting around saying, how do we make the most money out of this, is a huge, that's a massive, massive sort of turnaround. It's a massive dichotomy. There's a huge opposite there. And I don't think that Smith wants to admit it outright. But again, I have no such affiliation, so going forward in this video, as I make the argument that it is true that the suits are what ruin zombies, please just keep that in mind, and keep in mind as well, sorry, I got a little uncomfortable how I was sitting there, but please just keep in mind that we're going to be diving into that with no affiliation with Activision, with no affiliation with Treyarch or any of the other studios, with nothing potentially impacting our language under the surface that might be softening up the video.
No, it all just simply started for fun. It was a side project that was allowed to blossom organically. And remember that, because that is a key detail that will help highlight exactly where it was that zombies went wrong. But now let's get back on track with our...
There was an incredibly important track that was left here. This is another piece of evidence to the bit I just made about, the potential for contracts or speculation. That being the train of thought of a change from a creative endeavor to something worth profit. Right? The devs of World at War, that is, of course, the individual people working on it. I don't mean Treyarch as a company, I mean the individual people working on the separate game modes of Call of Duty World at War, and working more specifically on the After Zombies campaign mode, poured their heart and soul into it, okay? They worked and they fought to have it included. Like Lamia said, it was almost scrapped. And they built up an environment that was never before seen, never before experienced, not only really in Call of Duty, but in AAA titles as a whole. And I think that those devs, I genuinely believe, again, this is an opinion, but I genuinely believe that those devs still put just as much love into the game as they did in World at War. They still put just as much devotion, just as much time, and just as much thought into it as they ever have. Or if anything, it's increased, not decreased, as the maps get bigger, as the scale gets larger, etc. However, then you run into the issue of things like Monty's Factory, things like the Elixir Laboratory, and or the Plasma Laboratory rather, and those are just blatant attempts to monetize. You know, they're things that are void of creativity. As you know, they're basically just reskins of the loot box concept. This, when compared to Newton's Cookbook and the crate trade-ins for DLC weapons in BO3 and 4 respectively, really gives a distinction between what Treyarch adds and what Activision adds, right? Treyarch has added in BO3 a way for you to trade worse gums into better gums, and in BO4 has added a way for you to trade the supply cases that you work hard for into guaranteed weapons, instead of just having a test your luck scenario, right? So you can sort of do something with that luck. You can trade that luck in Black Ops 3 into better gums. You can trade that luck, or you can trade that time, that dedication in Black Ops 4, that little bit of extra grind into another melee weapon that you otherwise wouldn't have had. Whereas Activision has a much more clear role in implementing the things that you need to pay for in the beginning, the gobblegum, the plasma, the microtransactions, etc. Because of that sort of split, it's clear, it's beyond clear, that Activision has been pouring their budget into the game mode, right? Like, they've been spending extra money to make sure that these monetization options are included so that they can make more money, meaning that their investment in the project, at least from this bit, is money. That's all it is. They're not talking to the Treyarch devs, they're not talking to, you know, the Zombies crew. They're not looking at the gameplay, they're not trying to leverage early access to say, how does this actually fit in? They are mandating, we need to make money, basically. And they don't really seem to care about anything else, nor do they really have any reason to. And that, by definition, is an issue of corporate greed. And it's one that you'll be able to draw a chain throughout the rest of this video, throughout the rest of the series, and throughout the rest of Smith's video. You'll be able to see that corporate greed popping up again and again, and sort of getting in the way of what otherwise seems to me to honestly be a very devoted and creative and, like, loving and caring team of developers who are trying to make a video game that's genuinely incredible.
World at War Zombies continued on the success of its original map, eventually dropping 3 map packs which included Verrückt, Shironuma, and the fan favorite Therese. This also saw the introduction of our 4 iconic heroes: Tank Dempsey, Nikolai Belinsky, Edward Richthofen, and Takeo Masaki. Overall, for something that started from such humble beginnings, Zombies was already turning into a huge success. The fan base was small, but
a small fan base is often a dedicated one. I can't say this with 100% certainty, but a small fan base is a fan base. Like, you see Steve, you see the relaxing end. They're the people who are going to come in and push the game to its absolute limits. They'll essentially, in the process of playing the game naturally, of trying to master it, provide a sort of open beta for the devs on a scale that they couldn't fund internally, right? And this pseudo-beta likely contributed to the growth pattern you see in the games, even just in World at War, the implementation slowly of perks, of Pack-a-Punch, of the Wonder Weapon concept in the Wonderwaff, and then especially in the jump from Der Riese to Kino, where you see, you know, you get a much larger map, you get the first Wonder Weapon that has no negative side packs. It's, I guess, what you could call truly overpowered. And you get sort of this huge spike of growth between the first game and the second game, right, that's generated by that small community. There's no one else who could have done it. The devs don't have the funding or the time to manually test their game on that caliber, right? So just keep in mind that a small community is not necessarily a bad one. In fact, when a new idea is beginning, it's more often than not a good one.
But it certainly had a lot of room to grow with. So Black Ops 1 released November 9th of 2010, and with it we were given a brand new zombies experience, Kino Der Toten. While similar in quality to Der Riese, being the on-disc game put millions of new eyes onto this incredible game mode, helping to only further increase the love. This also marked the beginning of the Call of Duty Zombies community.
Back to what I previously said, the community was there. Kino was the map that brought the game into the mainstream light. Kino was the map that polished, that refined, that really perfected the systems of Der Riese and its predecessors, and combined that with a more ambitious layout, a wonder weapon that was truly overpowered in the Thunder Gun, a wonder weapon that's still coveted today, despite the fact that we have things like the Apothecon, like the Blood Gauntlet, like the Alistair's Annihilator, that all one-shot indefinitely. The fact that the Thunder Gun is still so coveted is absolutely incredible. And that refinement from the small community, that sort of feedback you saw in watching the small community in even just having a small sort of public test realm in World at War, was what led to the explosion in popularity that Smith is about to dive into a little bit, and sort of what thrust the mode from its post-game status into an actual fully fleshed out game mode in Call of Duty.
As YouTubers like the Syndicate Project and Yodislaya started making dedicated channels around the game. Black Ops 1 saw 4 new maps introduced and a look into what seemed to be an actual storyline for the game mode. Ascension, Call of the Dead, and Shangri-La had quest-styled Easter eggs which would allow fans to go deeper than ever before into the game and enrich themselves in the storyline. There was so much mystery behind the game that was being developed alongside community theories that made the game even more rich than ever.
None of this is inaccurate, right? None of this bit's actually wrong. I don't have a problem with the factual accuracy of this, because keep in mind that a lot of the zombie storyline was shrouded in myth. A lot of it still is today. And one of the things that we haven't even seen an answer to, despite the fact that Ether has been quote-unquote closed, is the fan theory, that Shangri-La is on Mars. So there's still mystery surrounding it. There's still sort of passion surrounding it. And even though we've had a full timeline released, there are still some things that we really don't know. Which is important to note. However, this statement is going to be used later, and it's going to be sort of taken not out of context, but out of time period, right? Black Ops 1 came out 10 plus years ago. Keep that in mind. 10 plus years is a lot of time for people to change. It's a lot of time for communities to change. It's a lot of time for the world to change. And most certainly a lot of time for video games to change. So while all of this is accurate, it's important to note that this is all accurate as of 10 years ago when all of this stuff was created.
And with the destruction of the Earth and Black Ops 1's finale Moon, the game was at an all-time.
Statistically speaking, this is just some nerdy stuff. I believe Black Ops 2 was bigger than Black Ops 1. That being said, I firmly believe that had I been old enough, by the way, I believe I was 7 at the time that Moon released. So I wasn't playing Call of Duty. I firmly believe that if I had been around to witness the Moon Easter egg ending personally, it would have been an incredible hook for the next game. I mean, keep in mind that, like, every Call of Duty has been based on Earth. You've kind of gotten used to this. At this point, you've gotten used to the boots-on-the-ground style of Call of Duty, the very Earth-like maps, the Earth-like design. And even in Zombies, you see, to this point, the most outlandish things we've seen, or the most outlandish map we've seen, is probably actually Shangri-La for sure. Although Shangri-La did take inspiration from Inca Mayan pyramids. It's the sort of southern Mexico into the middle America, the indigenous peoples to those locations. Their architecture is kind of where Shang got its inspiration. It's not, it's still very grounded on Earth. So to see that planet that we have gotten so used to existing on get blown up, get absolutely and thoroughly demolished at the end of Moon, is really a powerful hook to say, what are they going to do next? How on earth do we recover from this as a species, especially with the infection of zombies roaming around? Although, keep in mind that this is purely subjective. This is just my opinion, my speculation on how I would feel about it. Keep that in mind.
Not only was it a fantastic game mode, but the storyline was turning into something completely different. So Black Ops 2 Zombies would release a year after Moon, on November 12th of 2012. has been prone to criticism at the time both hardcore and casual players rejoiced. As we had to wait a year between maps, the community was just hungry for anything. It is worth noting, though, that Black Ops 2 did almost go off the rails. The new story was awkward, a little bit thrust in, and had less intriguing characters than Black Ops 1.
Keep in mind that character intrigue is purely subjective. It's up to you. No more defense on that, though, because I just wanted to reiterate, again, blowing up the planet where it's presumed that the entire story thus far has taken place makes it a little bit hard to continue a story, to pull out a story, right? So I'm not saying that the Black Ops 2 storyline is perfect, right? I'm not saying the changes that were made were perfect. I'm not saying that the crew that's thrown together for Transit, Buried, and Die Rise is perfect either by any stretch. But in terms of the situation they put themselves in, it actually doesn't seem like they were expecting a sequel at this point. And so to sort of dig themselves out of that hole, I think it's important to give a little bit of credit where credit is due for that one.
The general thirst for new Zombies content, however, did help to ease this issue. Now, with the release of the second DLC, Mob of the Dead, it introduced another separate storyline to make things even a little bit more confusing. However, fortunately, the strong gameplay made up for any sort of issues that the fans had. The true redemption of Black Ops 2 came with their final map, however, Origins. Arguably the greatest... Wait. Arguably? As the greatest Zombies...
Yes, arguably.
Map of all time, this was the setup map for Black Ops 3 and included alternate dimensional timeline versions of the characters we had met and fallen in love with from World at War. As something more exciting, ambitious, and storyline driven than any Zombies map ever, Origins allowed Black Ops 2 Zombies to end both with a bang, but also left a deep desire for more. And then, the community had to wait another 2 years. Call of Duty was moving from a 2-year development cycle to 3, and we had to go through Call of Duty Ghosts and Advanced Warfare before we could get to the next Treyarch game. But Activision had recognized that the Call of Duty community really liked side modes and decided, hey, we should make more of these. And this, in my opinion, is where Activision doomed Zombies. Because this is where it stopped being just a side passion project game mode and turned into map packs with zombie maps sell way better than multiplayer maps only.
I, humbly speaking, I don't even believe that was the logic. I think the logic was even a little bit more greedy than that, one step further. This is another example of Smith, in my opinion, softening his language. But it seemed to me like the forced implementation of these game modes, despite lack of story, despite lack of mechanical support, despite even lack of stability in some cases, was more of a statement of Activision asking, can we gross as much as we did off of Origins consistently by continuing this? Like, the thought process was kind of, okay, we've roped in millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions even, with Origins. If we keep this game mode up, do we just keep making that much money? It was essentially turning Zombies into a cash cow, and Ghosts and Advanced Warfare were when Activision began to sort of try their best, at least, to milk Zombies for all it was worth.
So let's just make a whole bunch of new game modes and jack up them profits. So Call of Duty Ghosts was first up to bat, and they dropped a brand new game mode called Extinction. It was a gigantic flop. And that's coming from someone who liked it.
It is a really, really cool game mode, like I said. It's very neat to play.
The storyline was garbage. It had uninteresting characters.
I haven't played Extinction personally. That's a quick disclaimer. That being said, it's unfair to assess the game mode based off of this judgment, these couple of lines in this video. If Ghost is cheap to buy right now, I'll pick it up and play the maps. I've heard that they're a cooperative experience, but again, I'll try to review them in depth later for you guys. Though for now, just be careful. This is a very quick, sort of off-the-cusp subjective statement, and I've actually talked to people who will defend Extinction's storyline as one of the better off-brand storylines. So it's purely subjective as of right now. It's a matter of opinion, and if I can reasonably, I'll come back at you with some reviews of the maps, some actual in-depth looks that really explain to you, that really tell you sort of what's going on with Extinction and whether or not this assessment is totally accurate.
And despite me playing the game for probably over 100 hours, I still don't even really know what happened. And on top of that, the gameplay was mediocre at best. But lastly, and I think this is important to note, is the community was just a little exhausted from that last year of zombies. This new game mode was just unable to spark and take flame like those original maps did in War.
There's also an issue of originality here. We can't forget that video games, much like movies, music, and books, are forms of art. They may not be, a painting on a wall or a sculpture, but they are still art. They require immeasurable creative design. They require immeasurable effort sunk into them. And oftentimes you can't produce them for profit because the sort of entry fee of creativity and of passion that you need to put into them is just too high if your goal is profit. That being said, I think an example is important because, the first thing that something like this is done in these fields, it's met with resounding success most of the time, even if it's part of a series of multiple, films, paintings, books, songs, whatever it is. Think about, as an example, Harry Potter and Star Wars, right? Are both incredibly well-respected franchises. I'm not saying that everybody loves them or everybody hates them, but they most certainly have earned their place in history and as household names. They did what they did incredibly well, right? And because of how well they've done what they did, you get other series that include magic, etc., sort of taking a hit for not being as good as Harry Potter initially, not being judged on their own, or especially with Star Wars. Star Trek is almost a perfect example, despite the fact that they have completely different plots, characters, universes. I don't really want to get into this argument, but despite the fact that they are essentially two different shows, because they both take place in space with sort of advanced technology, they're often judged against each other. And of course, for the sake of time, we're not going to dive any deeper into that. Suffice to say that the off-brand zombies modes, they really began to take on the sort of Christmas special type of vibe, that they were really just cobbled together to try to make money. That they weren't that they were done with no regard to the original story. That they were sort of what Baby Driver is to the original Fast and Furious, right? They're the same premise as movies, but they're not they're not equal. Although enough on that note, because again, those examples were purely subjective. I'm just trying to spark some imagination, make you sort of think of one that you can personally relate to sort of understand my point a little more fully. But at any rate, we're going to be back to the video now.
So after the pretty big failure of Ghosts, Advanced Warfare dropped Exozombies. Now, I'm sure that there are some people out there who liked Exozombies, but I gotta say it again, compared to any Zombies map previously,
I have Advanced Warfare still. I occasionally play Exozombies to this day. I'd be lying if I said I thought it was a good game, however, but it does showcase a problem. Not only was Advanced Warfare the first Call of Duty to feature the cybernetic enhancements, the leapfrogging around, the dashing left and right midair kind of thing, but the same mech suit was put into Zombies with no, sort of outside thought, with no other care. Alongside a new story, alongside a new pack-a-punch machine, alongside new special zombies, alongside new perks, alongside new weapons, everything about the game was changed, okay? So much so that Exozombies was actually an entirely different game mode from Call of Duty Zombies, save the fact that it was in a Call of Duty title. Such a massive change was, at least to me, way too much to take in one game. And I mean, it's even, I think, a little bit too much to this day, because, like, as I know the mechanics of the game now, and as I understand how the game works, how the progression works, it still feels a little bit off to me. It still feels just that little bit too different. That little bit, like it's a step beyond just innovative growth adding to a previous series, and more of a step in the direction of its own separate entity.
Exos also flopped. The game had uninteresting characters, and the storyline was completely forced down our throats. The gameplay felt like a cookie-cutter version of what Treyarch was doing, and it didn't even feature a zombies map on the disc.
This is the issue, in my opinion, the sole instance that doomed Black Ops 4. Under a similar premise with different circumstances. What you had with Advanced Warfare was, we know at this point that it was Activision coming in later into the development cycle and saying, we need you to add zombies, this has been successful. The company scrambling to put something together and ultimately not making the deadline, having already announced it. The result of that was that zombies came out for Advanced Warfare, but it came out late, the first map being released a full 4 months after the base game came out. Actually, wait a second. That math is wrong. It's 2 months. With the first DLC, Outbreak was released. Having to pay for it didn't do the community any favors. And beyond that, I think that this whole sort of mess set the precedent that zombies would fail if it was delayed. That it had to come out with the base game, that it had to be a part of the on-disc feature at launch, even though, as we've seen now, games have the capacity to do free updates that include massive features. Fallout 76 Wastelanders, No Man's Sky had a complete reinvention. I don't know what the name of the update was, though. And, you know, just those sweeping overhauls to games that have existed are clear proof that Treyarch could have delayed zombies that extra 2, 3, 4 months. So why didn't they? I think the only logical answer is because of the absolute mess that delaying zombies 2 months here had. And I think that's what caused again, this is an opinion, but that, logically to me, that precedent is what caused Black Ops 4 Zombies to be released in such a fractured, untested, unplayable state.
Compare these two game modes to World at War, which allowed the storyline to build itself in an organic and natural way.
To play devil's advocate, just for a little bit, that's not true. That's not entirely true, at least. Those who would become the zombies characters started out as stereotypes of the societies from which they hailed, with voice lines like, "This is from the Emperor," coming from Takio randomly upon knifing a zombie, and "kicking ass and getting paid," two of my favorite things, coming from Tank upon killing a zombie. I don't think I need to dive too far into why those are stereotypes for a Japanese and an American person, respectively, so we're just going to continue.
With these other two films, though, it felt like they had just taken the zombies format that had now found success and were now trying to mass produce it. And this highlights so clearly how Activision missed the point of what zombies was. It wasn't something that could be rushed or forced, and the storyline that they had found was something extremely delicate and special. So after 2 years of what was basically the hardcore fans tolerating these new maps and the casuals not even really knowing what was going on, Black Ops 3 was finally back to the plate, and Black Ops 3 Zombies struck its 4th home run in a row.
And in doing so, Black Ops 3 proved a vital point. Black Ops 3 was the proof that zombies cannot go back. What made it great once cannot make it great again. Don't get this confused. I'm not talking about a complete overhaul to the base gameplay here. What I'm talking about is the growth of the game mode, the growth of the maps, the growth from, basically just a box with a couple of dividers put into it on Kino Der Toten, to the labyrinthian hallways, walls, waterfalls, and fast travels of Shangri-La, to the branched out style, the very spread out, purposeful layout of Shadows of Evil. The maps themselves have evolved. A regression to what originally hooked us on zombies would logically be just a regression at this point. It would feel more boring, it would feel more bland, it would actually end up feeling like less of a zombies experience rather than more of it.
The power of the new console has only further expanded and immersed us into the zombies experience. The gameplay was more insane and rewarding than ever.
There were, I believe, 4 descriptors put on Black Ops 3 Zombies in that sentence. So I just had to warn you guys, the standard warning on this channel, be careful of language. There's a lot of language here, and if you take it at its word, it'll make Black Ops 3 sound amazing. And the grandeur that Smith conveys talking about this isn't fact, although it may be popular opinion. I mean, I personally believe that Black Ops 3 was an amazing game as well, but again, keep in mind, it's not fact. Please, play the game for yourself before you decide if this statement is true or not. Sit down, sink some time into the games, do the Easter eggs, experience the story, experience the maps, even experience the microtransactions, experience the gobblegum trade-ins. Like, experience the game as a package before you make a decision about whether it's good or bad.
Furthermore, the Zombies community on YouTube was bigger than ever before, and this only helped to drive the hype train. We were given some new characters, but they were related and building off of our original storyline, so we were automatically and already invested. Black Ops 3 told us a grand and epic story, and despite it having an ending that was controversial, we were given one that was satisfying, that left the door open for more, much more. And then, for the 5th year in a row, hardly a month after the end of Revelations, a new Zombies map dropped. You start to see a problem here? Infinity Ward was back with another Zombies remake. This time, Infinite Warfare.
This game, Infinite Warfare, had a writing issue so fundamentally flawed it couldn't even form its own identity. It dealt a massive blow to the Zombies community, and in the words of J.R. Rizzo, a more prolific Zombies YouTuber than myself, or Zombies reviewer than myself, the game didn't even know whether or not it should take itself seriously. That point drives home the issue with Infinite Warfare, and ultimately the issue that was taken forward into Black Ops 4. With both Chaos and Ether being present in the game didn't really have an opportunity to form an identity for itself, to sort of concrete, to cement the new perk system, the new characters, the new maps, to develop them interestingly, to really sort of create that hook that World at War had, remakes aside.
General positive reception from the first map, I think it's safe to say that at this point, the community was getting a little bit tired. Despite Zombies in Spaceland being a great map, the thirst that had once driven the community was now relatively satiated. Unfortunately, Activision had more to give us. In total, we would be given 5 maps from the Infinite Warfare Zombie storyline, each being received with less enthusiasm than the last. But in the spring of that year's cycle, something weird happened. We got Zombies Chronicles, an entire Zombies DLC. So, were we tired of zombies? Well, this actually confirmed that was maybe, partially at least, not the case. Zombies Chronicles featured 8 Zombies remakes and was the best-selling add-on in the PlayStation Store of 2017. So, clearly, the Zombies community was not dead. They were just sick of all the non-Treyarch stuff. But moving on from here, fall came, and for the 6th year in a row, we got a new game mode, World War II Zombies. Now, I probably don't need to keep repeating myself, but as you may have guessed, this non-Treyarch game mode was another flop. Actually, by far, the biggest flop for any side game mode yet.
Google searches yielded no helpful stats, as usual on Call of Duty sales statistics, but from my time playing the game and conversations with other members of the community, this isn't true. GameCrate, a tech review website, reviewed the game mode as having struck a good balance between being accessible to new players and being something hardcore players could invest in over a long term, which sounds to me like a pretty glowing review. So I repeat the sentiment I had earlier: please play the game, please enjoy and experience the package before making a decision on whether it was actually a flop.
It really just seemed like no studio studio could hit the nail on the head quite like Treyarch.
It's true World War II did worse than Black Ops 3, making Treyarch the premier producer for zombies. Then again, that's in terms of money. That's purely in terms of money, not player enjoyment or community support. So again, as the theme of this video is sort of arguing against corporate greed, I find it important to just point out here that success is being measured in terms of income generated here, not necessarily in terms of community support.
Now quickly, before we get into Black Ops 4, I do need to do a recap of all this. So in summary, Treyarch Zombies was built slowly, methodically, and originated out of passion. The gameplay and characters evolved with us. New perks and weapons were slowly added in and evolved over the years. Character development and storyline was not thrown in our faces, but was left to kindle and burn for our theories to discover things. Even the difficulty of acquiring wonder weapons advanced with us, from simply getting lucky at a box to challenging multi-part step processes. In a nutshell, it did exactly what it should have done. It evolved by expanding on what we like to stay fresh while remaining relatable to our past experiences by keeping all the features that we knew zombies to love. It evolved with its community. But on the other hand, all the zombies clones that we saw simply tried to build off of what Treyarch had done. See, it feels like Activision assumed.
I agree fundamentally with the statement that everybody was trying to build off of what Treyarch had done. That being said, it's incredibly important to notice that Zombies was essentially a catch-22 for non-Treyarch producers. They were late to the game with the simple hook of Kino Der Toten, and with the sort of early on story development that formed the core of the game mode. So they had to try to cram it all into one game, into one map even, otherwise it would be too easy to be entertaining. Like if you had Origins, if you had Mob of the Dead in Black Ops 2, and then in Advanced Warfare you had a Kino Der Toten remake with an exosuit, of all things. It would have been sort of unplayably easy. That being said, I would be surprised if they actually wanted to include zombies game modes versus, trying to develop their own unique identities in game modes like the Modern Warfare series began doing with survival mode. Again, they were likely bottlenecked into zombies, and as Smith sort of touched on but glazed over, this was very, very likely due to Activision wanting to make money, and again sort of echoing that sentiment, that question of whether or not they could make as much off of this as they did off of Origins.
They could get the other studios to just make a new game with the features of zombies, and because it followed that model, it would be a success. See, they failed to understand what made zombies zombies in the first place. That amazing ambiance, incredible gameplay, unyielding creativity, one kick-ass storyline, and again, a whole lot of passion. See, it was not something that could simply be mass-produced. Treyarch Zombies just had an X factor.
There was no X factor. I'm gonna say it straight up, didn't exist. There was no X factor. This video, Smith's video that is, and of course my response to it, both make clear that the position for that in order for something to be successful, the position it needs to originate from is one of love, is one of creative ingenuity, is one of passion, not one of money. Beyond forming the core of the argument for the importance of zombies, this is kind of the final nail in the coffin for Activision here. There's a pattern. Activision tries to make more and more money off the game mode following Black Ops 2, right? Less and less people play the game. People hate it more. Monty's Factory was poorly received, so was the Plasma Factory. The rushed development of BO4 really drained the game, in the opinions of many. And it really sort of made it void of the love that's been seen in previous games. I mean, even the color palette on 9 is more bland than the color palette in most of Black Ops 3 Zombies. To cap it off, Smith argues that every non-Treyarch game mode was worse. With such very difficulty design and mechanics, the only factor that is significant, the only thing that's the same that you could really judge those modes on, to create an actual spectrum based off of, like, sort of repeatable study to create some sort of scientific spectrum, rather, of the non-Treyarch game modes, is the money. They were all made with the intent on capitalizing the success of Black Ops Zombies, not for the sake of prolonging the community. That, in my opinion, could and should be considered the sole reason for any perceived decline in the zombies community. And with that sort of note on decline, we are going to be drawing an end to the first part in this series. So I just wanted to thank you for watching, remind you to like the video, to comment. If you have any issues, you can find my social media in the description. If you don't want to leave a YouTube comment to help the algorithm, I do want to hear your feedback somehow. And again, I'm sorry for any background noise. My mic is very sensitive right now. I do have a noise gate coming. It should be here before I record part 2. So we're going to put all 3 parts of this video up with this layout probably 3 or 4 days apart, roughly, just for some timeline. And also, I wanted to apologize. This one ran a bit long. It did also cover 5 minutes of extra video length compared to, what I was going to say it covered. But again, to be running up the 56-minute mark, I apologize. I'm going to try to keep them shorter from now on. However, there is a lot to say. There's a lot to unpack here, and I know I'm going to miss something. So again, if I do, feel free to talk to me, feel free to comment. I will do my best to respond to all of them as I see them. And I'll see you in a couple of days with the next entry.